Hi there, and welcome to the Beach House Garden Diary. In this video, I'll take you through everything I did during the 2024 gardening season. And we start with the month of April, where it's finally getting warm enough so that any gardener can get outside and start working. At that time of the year, there's not too much to do outside other than clear up the winter damage, fallen branches, smooth out the grass surfaces, and make plans for the coming season. In my case, it was clearly visible that I had one enormous task in front of me, which was painting and repairing my fence. There was also a lot to be done in the vegetable garden because everything that I have here has been neglected for the last 5 years due to my studies abroad. But as always, it was the case also with this spring. The bright sun just wakes you up from the hibernation, and there is a massive burst of motivation that gets you working on everything that needs to get done. One of the very first things that I had to tackle was to clean up the very filthy road that I have coming to my land. So first I started just with the edges. After that, I started to remove the moss between the stones. At first, I was only using some hand tools, making this a pretty time-consuming task. But little by little, I did make some progress. While doing this work, I also discovered the larvae that is causing badgers to constantly dig up my grass. I'm living here with my cat Kittu, who is the biggest supervisor of any work. And to progress faster with the driveway, I purchased this hand tool. It indeed made scraping much faster and gave the impression of a good progress. But even after a full month of scraping, we couldn't wash the stones as our pressure washer was not powerful enough. However, just as I had hoped that the spring is finally here and that we can really start the gardening season, we witnessed an insane overnight snowstorm that covered everything under 50 centimeters of snow. And when that finally melted, we were more concerned about the broken branches that laid everywhere around the garden than finishing up cleaning the driveway. So here we are, collecting everything into a huge pile and burning the smaller branches. These two activities took me a whole month, and only on the last day of April, I managed to start with dismantling the broken fence. This broken segment was about 30 meters long, and it was the heavy autumn storm which had broken the metallic foundation post of the fence. It was then time to move into the vegetable garden that had been completely neglected for the past 5 years, and I started with removing some of the thyme bushes that were growing in the walking area between the raised beds.
Look, it's walkable now.
Then, one garden bed at a time, we started to clean it up from the old plants and prepare the surfaces for the new gardening season. I had stored some flock flowers in these raised beds, but they were completely overgrown with goutweed, so I had to change my approach and instead of saving every single plant, become rootless.
Alright, with the first ring, I'm gonna collect all the pots, just the loose pots, everywhere. There's gonna be plenty.
So I divided my activities into steps, and the first step was to collect all the loose pots that I had in my garden and all the plants that were either dead or half dead. I think there was around 50 pots of plants and enormous amount of loose phlox flowers that had to be planted. I had also saved some strawberry plants from this activity, and also these were planted within the same gardening day. And this is how the vegetable garden looked after these rootless gardening days. It was then time to get some more gardening chores done, but outside of the vegetable garden. And one of these was giving fertilizers to all of the conifers and arborvitae trees.
And this is the time for the spring onions. Maybe we are a little late with these seeds because some of them are already tossy, but maybe some of them will still work, so let's put them down.
It was only the beginning of May, but I was already feeling I am so behind of any work in the garden, including sowing the onions, beans and beets. And it was then time to take out the heavy machinery and start the mowing season. In the beginning of the season, it's not just mowing the grass for us, but also smoothing out the badger damage.
Let's do it!
Then some money and time had to be spent in order to swap out some of the rhododendrons that didn't survive the cold and moist winter that we had this year. And then it was time to finally plant some summer flowers into the planters. I was very excited to observe how these combinations would work out this year.
And now I'm gonna do such a me thing, which is repurposing one plant which has been waiting for its destiny forever and plant it exactly there.
And even if I'm trying to be a rootless gardener, I can't kill a plant. So here I'm trying to see if an alpine garden plant would survive in a summer flower pot. And yes, I was just so happy how it turned out. And during the first days of my gardening vacation, I also took out my robotic lawnmower called Ropu from his winter compartment. However, Ropu rushed right to the old fireplace and then, after rescuing, straight to the rose bed. So I knew I needed some more intelligent help for Ropu in order to keep the grass growth in my garden in shape.
A new Ropu!
Boy, was I excited or what? That was a reference station-based wireless robotic lawnmower capable of mowing the yards up to 15,000 square meters in size.
This part here is for the reference signal, and this part here is for the mower itself. So let's do it.
So first I had to install the power cables for the reference station and the charging station. The reference station had to be installed somewhere where it had a clear visibility to the sky and also to the all areas in the garden. But there seemed to be some more components to the installation.
Oh my. Oh my. Well, this was the most difficult day I've ever had with any kind of technology. This little thing did not start working at all. And I had to just... I got quite angry.
And the component that I was referring to here was the software, specifically the Husqvarna Connect app, which had some severe problems in the beginning of May. In May, I also invested in my very first thermocomposter, which was supposed to keep on composting the whole year around. Honestly, this was just insane on how much stuff could I pour into this composter throughout this gardening season. And at times it really was full, but with just a couple of days, everything has already settled and there was more room for new stuff to be composted. In the meanwhile, we also planted some potatoes and in general got the vegetable garden in the best shape it had been in a while. We also planted some smaller shrubs in the back of the garden And here's Henry, my little helper, waving for you. What a tiny power machine this guy is! And this is the garden after our planting activity. Now the next challenge was to transplant this insanely massive rubber plant. And very naively, I thought it's gonna be just a little bit of digging to get this guy out. But after half an hour of digging, my mom had to step in and help me out as I was exhausted and this plant did not move. Only after an hour of heavy exercise, we finally got it out and were able to move it to its new location. Ta-da! And as most of the garden beds had already been equipped, there was just one corner that was missing some plants. And these were some tomatoes, some cucumber plants, and some zucchinis. So these were planted on 20th of May, and I wasn't really sure whether I was late or not with this planting activity. But in hindsight, considering how much harvest I got for the outside plants, I think I was just on time. But then I had to switch gears and move away from the vegetable garden and start working with the backside of my garden. It grows wild quite fast, and hence it is important to mow it and trim it at least once a month. So here I was in the end of May doing this for the first time in the season. But as we were entering the heat wave, I was in a hurry to build some shade for the freshly planted cucumber and tomato plants. So for this, I dismantled some old, tiny greenhouse frames.
And look at that mess.
I then aligned them all up, washed them with the pressure washer, and stained them into a black color, after which they were ready for being assembled. I opted for simple A-frames, just to make it quick and easy. And then it took a little bit more time to assemble them on the raised beds, and my plants were saved. Look how nice and shady it is in here. I then had to quickly start working on the new drainage hole cover, which had broken over the last years. For this, I assembled a tiny frame, which was holding the cover in the place, stained it as everything else, and then cut the whole cover into a round shape. Stained it one more time and put it in the place. At that point in time, I was so proud of my garden. I think it looked just magnificent. So neat and tidy, as officially the growing season hadn't yet started in Estonia, and all the plants were still tiny. At that point in time, I was also very obsessed with staining everything into this black color of mine and planting a lot of summer flowers everywhere. My love for this black stain was so big that I even started to stain the raised beds into this color, despite the fact that they were already quite old and in reality need to be swapped in the next coming years. But doesn't it look so much better? Well, at least it gave it a very fresh look. Oh my god, and when it seems to you that it is a little bit rushing through the time in here, then it indeed felt like that also when doing all these activities. So here I'm planting a tiny little pine tree that had been waiting for its destiny more than a year. And then it was time to plant myself a birch forest, which initially only included 3 birch trees. The inspiration for that came from the insane heat wave that we had, and I was hoping that in the future these tiny trees will provide me with some well-needed shade. And then the month of June was here. I started this with the works in my rose bed, which was heavily damaged by the cold and moist winter. The lavendulas there were completely dead, so I had to remove all of them, which was a pity, as these are one of my favorite plants in the garden. Furthermore, the junipers that had been living in this place for at least 6 to 7 years got heavily damaged by the burning sun which we had in the month of April. So this flower bed had such a harsh start to the year that my heart was just crying. This is all that was left from a fluffy, full rose bed filled with junipers and other plants. But I am very happy to state that by the end of the gardening season, all the plants had recovered and looked better than ever before. June was also the month when I started to tackle all of the piles in the back of my garden, starting with the mulch pile. As this mulch was compiled by mostly hardwood, I used this to cover all my gardening beds, and this really did keep the weeds under control. I also decided to swap all the mulch between my garden beds. So I first removed the old mulch and took it to the back of the garden and used a new conifer bark based mulch to install the new one. And this is how the garden looked after all the painting and mulching activities. Of course, there are some more flower beds here and there in my garden, and also these got a good de-weeding and mulching, looking pretty sharp after that. And this is where I dumped the old mulch, just between some huge birch trees in the back of my garden, where nothing really grows and the robotic lawnmowers as well the tractor gets stuck. So it was a good place to start a new mulch bed. On some evenings I wasn't that productive and only cleaned the surroundings of the berry bushes, which surprisingly also made quite a big difference to the overall appearance of the garden. And just like that, it was a midsummer and me and my mom started to tackle a very overgrown flower bed in the front side of the garden. Once done with that, we moved on to clean and mulch the surroundings of the tiny pine tree that we had planted a couple of years ago.
Yay! Finally there is a new mulch around the pine tree. We've also removed some of the very ugly junipers. We have removed a lot of weeds from this flower bed.
And even though if I like working with the flowers more than anything else, I had to return to the front yard and clean up some of the mint junipers that had been also severely damaged by the bright spring sun. After this, there was barely anything left. But I had something in mind that required the surroundings of the fence to look as clean as possible. That meant a lot of trimming. And I used this activity also to trim the old and not functional pumpkin bed. And there was even enough momentum to clean up some of the plants. And remember this birch tree forest that I wanted to plant in the front of my garden.
This is almost midnight planting. There we go. Junipers incoming.
Well, I decided to add some more plants to that. And here we are doing the late evening planting for some junipers. We then dumped all the leftover soil around the birch trees where there was this new mulch bed in the formulation. And despite all the busy running in the garden, we also managed to go and pick some berries. But there was one thing in the garden that I myself could not address. And that was moving the huge stones that were surrounding the pumpkin bed and had to be now moved to create a new focal point around the rose bed.
Wow! This is becoming a new focal point in my garden. I'm super happy how it's evolving.
So it was my task here to install the mulch canvas and secure it with the nails. Thanks to my friend, we were able to install the canvas and the ropes in place with just one day, and I could distribute the mulch over the next coming days. And I was so excited about this new focal point in my garden that I got it ready with just a couple of days.
Woohoo! This gorgeous thing is ready! Ah! We're so happy!
But as I also had to rake and even all the soil works that we did in the backside of the garden, I was exhausted. And instead to return and clean the driveway myself, I hired a professional just because they had the tools and they had the knowledge and they were so much quicker than I would have ever been. And this is how white and bright the driveway looked after they had finished. And that gave me a little bit of time to return to my garden, which was by now a bit overgrown, and do my first harvest, which was onions and garlics at the time. For some reason, these were super tiny, but regardless of that, edible. I then ordered myself a bunch of U-shaped metal rods, which I installed around my tiny shrubs.
This is so much better.
In the back and in the front of the garden, and as well to support the peas in the vegetable garden. And then my lovely mom and my favorite Henry were back to help me with some gardening tasks, and this time we were sowing some flower grass seeds. In addition, we added some specialty flowers. We raked all the seeds in and as well pressed them in with the grass press. We were actually very surprised how Henry could actually roll it, as this was heavy. The final task for the day was to move some stones to surround the fireplace. In the meantime, the summer flowers in the containers were going crazy with their growth, and I'm convinced that I'm going to use this combination also next year. To boost the second flowering of the season, I also removed some of the flowering heads from the salvias and catnip plants. At first, I wasn't really sure that it was helping with the second flowering, but it seems to me that it actually did. And then I started to extend the flower bed in the front of the garden. I first pressed down the new temporary edges, laid some cardboard in between, using all the boxes I had at hand, poured in some mulch, and rushed to the back side of the garden to get some new logs to surround the flower bed with. The first success was to activate the motor saw, of course. Yay! Happy dance! But the work didn't wait, so I had to collect a full cartload of logs and get them to the front of the garden in order to surround the new flower bed with them. For some reason, I just fell in love with this little bit rustic look of the flower beds.
And what comes to the flowers, I am absolutely in love with the flowers here on the first bed. And so are the bumblebees. They are not such a big fans of phloxes, but they sure love this plant. It's a herb which has a name that I don't know, majoran in Estonian. Then here these flowers are very popular among the bees and bumblebees and also butterflies. And this thing with the blue flowers also is very popular. I'm happy that the bees are back. I was already starting to worry because there was so little of them this year. But they are back. That's great.
And just like that, it was also time for the bean harvest. And I got such a huge amount from these tiny patches because not all of them came up in the springtime. And there was no escape. I just had to tackle painting the fence. But for this, I first had to remove all the plants that were covering the fence in order for me to access it. So here I am working behind the arborvitae trees and collecting huge pile of grasses and flowers and nettles. This is how it looked, collected just from one side of the garden. No, the other side I was planning to clean up by using the trimmer. And I even used a special metallic blade to cut this very high and thick grass. Then I also found some motivation to clean up the huge piles of the branches that had fallen with the heavy snow in the springtime. These branch piles were also on the way of painting the fence that I had been postponing for a couple of months already because there were just so many works that had to be done beforehand. Here I'm cutting one of the biggest branches that had fallen from the trees on my fence. But okay, now at least everything is cleaned up. We can repair the damage and paint the whole fence.
This project has a major impact on the appearance of my garden. The project I'm talking about is painting my fence. But starting with this project is very, very hard because the fence is 400 meters long and this task feels a bit overwhelming.
But I started anyway, and that was on 8th of July 2024. I picked the gate as the first target and started staining everything black. Already that tiny move gave me assurance that I absolutely love the color I had picked for the fence. But as it took me so long to start, the jungle in the front of the garden had grown back, so I had to tackle this again. So here I am pruning the rose bushes in order to access the fence. And I had to do it from the both sides. Then I also trimmed everything again, even my tiny wildflower patch in the front of the garden.
I think it's time to take down this wildflower thing here so that it would grow again next year.
And that preparation work took a whole day. So when I finally got to painting the fence, it was already 8 o'clock in the evening. But I still managed to do a couple of panels. This time I used a roller which one of my friends had suggested. It was definitely comfortable to work with that, but it didn't hold too much paint in it. So when my mom came to visit me to help, we picked specialty brushes specifically made for staining the wood, and that made work so much easier. However, I wanted to try out something even more efficient, and that was the spray painter. This was my first time to use this tool, and I was so afraid. Well, the pity thing is that despite the horrible sound, the tool is super efficient but use enormous amount of paint.
The other thing with this is that you have a cord and you just have to manage this cord all the time. That's fun.
But if the wind is from the right direction, it is doable and it is very fast to work with.
Yes, yes, this is the hair of a heavy work day, and I have managed to clean all this rubble and bramble and branches and stuff that was there on the other side of the fence.
So that meant it was time to buy some more stain and paint and do some more spray painting. I was targeting the fence, of course, but on this very day I was working downwind from the fence, which meant I was fully covered from top to the toe with this very stain.
Oh boy, it's 8:20 in the evening and I'm finally done for the day. So this was exactly 8 hours that I was painting this fence.
And as this loud vacuum cleaner sound just drove me crazy,
I am not going to use the spray painter tomorrow.
instead I was making another fire to burn out all the brambles and branches from the other side of the fence. But this is how the fence looks after the painting, and I must say I am in love with this new appearance. But it wasn't too long before the next project arrived in my garden. This is a beach lime grass, and I am going to plant it all into my garden, specifically to the area below the pine trees where nothing really grows. So I'm separating these plants into tinier patches and putting them down. There was around 60 different patches that I planted, and this is how it looked before I started to install the borders for this flower bed. All these branches were from the snowstorm in the spring, and I was very happy to find the proper home for them where they would really complement the garden.
Yoo-hoo! And regardless of the fact that the weather has, oh yes, fully turned into the next thunderstorm, I love this garden bed. And I'm going to give you also a look from the house, because it's getting a little bit dangerous in here.
But after heavy rain or hail comes the sun and time to pick the tomatoes, which are ready, alongside with potatoes and some huge zucchinis.
Yoo-hoo! And this is my third harvest of the year.
But my mind was continuously with the limegrass bed, where I wanted to plant some hydrangeas and rhododendrons alongside with some roses and parovskas, and even some tiny junipers. So here I am transporting all the pretty plants to the backside of my garden. And this is the first session of the early morning and late evening planting sessions that I had in the back of this garden. Over the weekends, sometimes also my great little helper Henry and my mom came to help. And all kind of different things happened, like breaking the wheel of the garden cart. Doesn't matter. Look at my mom shoveling all this mulch quickly to the limegrass bed. Luckily, we found all the broken pieces for the wheel and got it repaired, so we could continue with the work. We were then laying down the last pieces of the cardboard that we had, the last pieces of mulch, and we transformed this empty area into this gorgeous looking lime grass bed. Walking in the backside of the garden now really does feel like walking in the botanical gardens. It's so pretty. And to make it even more pretty, I decided to empty this ugly fertilizer bag into one of the empty compost bins. And this is how it looks afterwards.
Look at that! There is no ugly, horrible big bag in the back of my garden anymore. I'm so happy. And this is where I put it. It looks so much neater now.
In addition,
These tiny little branches of juniper, they have been waiting here the whole summer in this pocket.
and after dealing with this ugly fertilizer bag, I knew exactly that they are going to be planted just here under these birch trees.
This is how they got into the place. And I hope they would feel like at home.
However, the misty autumn mornings were there, and the fence building project could not be postponed any further. So over the summer, I was fully able to dismantle the fence in the backside of my garden. These few days where I had time to work on the fence happened over multiple months. So here you can see only a very short overview of them all. And after cleaning the work area, I was ready to play around with a new location for the fence. And after a little bit of help from the friend who helped me to create the beautiful rose bed in the front of the garden and kick down the couple of first segments for this fence, I managed to start with the building process. I took it step by step, targeting about 4 to 5 segments per day and twice the amount for the weekend days. I tried to work smart and use some of the ready panels as templates in order to cut the wood in the front yard. And I was surprised that it fitted like a glove. I was so happy. But it was then time to move on to some more challenging tasks, which included installing the panels and the posts. I started to do that as well, one panel at a time, and I measured the location of the post according to the panel. So that helped a lot and reduced the time spent on measuring. The most difficult ones were of course the first few panels, as were the first few blanks that I had to install myself. It was getting dark really fast these days, and it was getting complicated to actually see. Luckily, by that time, I had developed some methods on how to install this fence by myself, and I was making a very good progress.
That's on charging. This is what we have in here. More or less prepared for tomorrow. And I am going to work on this pile.
And before installing the last blanks, I really wanted to wash them from all the algae so that the stain would stick better. And after I was done with installing these, I cut off all the overhang and started to paint the fence. Even though I was trying to be as quick as I could, I was still running late and worked until the sunset.
What a gorgeous autumn day it is today. And I have a fence in the background. Let me show you closer. This fence is ready, and I am so happy. My garden finally has a new border, which not only is functional, but it is also gorgeous. So black and shiny. So black and shiny.
And to my defense, for taking a whole summer in order to paint and build a new fence, I must say I was a little bit distracted by my robotic lawnmowers this summer. They were just getting stuck after every second day, and I had to go and rescue them with my phone in my pocket. Considering the size of my garden and considering the problems with the Connect app, I often had to spend 15 to 20 minutes for the fourth localization and activating the mowers again. So here are a couple of clips on their behavior, standing here and there and not doing any mowing work. But it also gives you a good overview how the garden has changed over the whole time period. That is definitely one of my goals for the next years. Get the robotic lawnmowers into shape so that I wouldn't have to run after them every second day. And then there were the last planting sessions in the garden to get everything down before the winter. There were 4 syringas and 3 of the sedum plants that we planted in the front of the garden, 3 junipers that I planted close to the apple trees, a beautiful stackhorn sumac tree that I got as a present from my friend, and some raspberry plants that I planted to the back of my garden. And despite the fact that we still had some sunny days, the evenings were super short and I was in super hurry to finish everything before the winter comes. So here, for example, is a quick and improvised wood storage space where I store all my wood over winter. And then I took a full day to clean up the garden shelter in order to store the tractor inside and find everything we may possibly need during the winter time. And just before the first snow, I was also able to remove,
I didn't even ever plant it.
all the summer plants that I wanted to keep over winter for the storage indoors. And this is the first snow on 20th of November. It is the latest time to prepare for the hygge, to give some warm light during these dark and cold days. And that is one gardening season in Estonia, from the very beginning until the last days. As now it is time to hibernate, drink hot chocolate and enjoy the quiet time. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was interesting to observe one full season from the beginning to the end. I wish you all the best and hope to see you here for the next gardening season. Take care.